Hollywood has this imaginary concept that there's a huge untapped audience out there of extremely progressive, hardcore, left-wing young people out there who are desperate for entertainment that just, appeals to all of those sensibilities, everything that comes with it. And so they've made film after film, and they've adapted and retooled older films and older franchises to try to pivot towards this audience that they're convinced is out there if they can just reach them. And that's really the main explanation for the destruction of these big pop culture franchises. Why things like Star Wars went down the tubes. Why it suddenly got like swamped with girl bosses who were just amazing at everything, and it all became about gender politics and stuff. Why things like Marvel suddenly had the same thing happen to it. And the reality is their core audience has never changed. If you're talking about things like science fiction, fantasy, that sort of thing, it's predominantly men who are going to be watching it. It always has been, and it always will be. It doesn't mean that women can't watch it as well, but it's generally men. And the moment you start berating them or, minimizing them, or certainly in the case of a lot of movies now, having an active backlash against them the moment they criticize anything about it and create this weird contentious environment, you lose them as your audience, and you don't replace them with anything else, because fundamentally they are your core audience, and you lead to box office flop after box office flop and underperformers. And that's what we've been seeing. They've been courting a modern audience that doesn't exist and is never going to buy their product anyway. And they've lost their existing audience in the process.
And one thing that I find so infuriating about a lot of the kind of, whether it's diversity casting or the kind of girl boss trope, is that the characters in the end are very thin. They're very, inhuman in a way. That there are so many rich stories and characters that could exist, that could, could be diverse, could have interesting female leads. Mm-hmm. But they never are. They're always a sort of very thin caricature of what is expected to be in these films.
It's because they can't allow them to go on the hero's journey anymore. Like generally with your protagonist, they start out in one particular place in life, like they want to aspire to something, or they're given some adventure to go on. They encounter many obstacles and journeys along the way. They make mistakes. They have the downward arc where they doubt themselves. They eventually learn some kind of lesson about themselves that allows them to rise up and then triumph over whatever adversary they're up against. It's the classic hero's journey, success, failure, fall, rise again, easy. The problem is they're never willing to do that, because it means exposing them to a bit of vulnerability and a little bit of the acknowledgement that they're not perfect initially. They have to learn things and they have to improve themselves. And for some reason, they just seem to be allergic to doing that with any kind of female or diverse characters. The message instead becomes, you are perfect the way you are, and it's actually the rest of the world that just needs to acknowledge your greatness. And it's almost like the external world is the one that goes on the character arc instead of the protagonist. And the result then is, well, if your protagonist is never put through any trials and they never learn anything and they don't have any vulnerability or humanity to them, what on earth is the audience supposed to latch onto? There's nothing there. And as you say, you end up with a very thin, vapid, uninteresting character that's meant to be driving your story. It's a lesson I've tried to address many times throughout my videos. I've tried to explain why it doesn't work, but they keep doing it, man. It's impressive how stupid they are.
Do you think, will they ever stop? I mean, it does seem as if these, a lot of Hollywood films are not making money. A lot of the biggest franchises, as you said, people are turning their backs on them. Many films that you'd expect several years ago to be a guaranteed hit are completely flopping. Is Hollywood getting the message at all? Or are they taking the wrong message as well, alternatively? Because it does seem as if a lot of these films are still being churned out.
They are still churning them out. I mean, the most recent example probably was Supergirl, which flopped disastrously. Again, not understanding their audience and perhaps not even understanding the character they were working with. But in a broader sense, I think we've passed the peak of this stuff. I think the worst of it was probably, 3 or 4 years ago when it was just absurd. And they needed to, have that decent stretch of failures in order to start to turn things around. But Hollywood moves slowly. Studios move slowly because, from start to finish, a movie can take 4 or 5 years. And so you're still seeing the dregs of that era coming out now. But I think, for the most part, they have kind of passed the peak of it, and they're starting to pivot back to more general storytelling. It doesn't mean we're going to get great movies now. I think I've heard a lot of people say we have left perhaps the era of woke and we're entering the era of slop, where it's not politically motivated anymore. It's not trying to forward some social cause, but it's still crap movie making because you've lost a lot of that pool of talent that you diversity hired out of these roles. Like the writers' rooms are completely different now from what they were 10, 15 years ago. And you can't necessarily build that back in a hurry. A lot of these people will have moved on to other industries and they can't be replaced necessarily. So they've created quite the problem for themselves, and it's going to take a lot of humility and a lot of time and probably a lot of money to put it right. But I've got no sympathy for them because they entirely inflicted it on themselves.
Absolutely. And would you say, is there a particular film or a particular series that best embodies these kinds of trends? What's like the worst example of all this?
Oh gosh,
in your view? I mean, that's a tough question,
quite
I guess. There's so
field
many bad examples.
I think it might be the Acolyte from Star Wars. It was a TV show that they made a couple of years ago, and it was insane. It embodied everything. It's the two leads are a pair of black lesbians who are twins, played by the same actress, obviously. It centers around a coven of lesbian space witches who are also communist, I think, because they share everything. These two women are actually birthed by two other women through the power of the Force or something. The Jedi, which you remember from Star Wars, are generally portrayed as these wise warrior monks, very, very, very much the guardians of peace and justice. They're portrayed as corrupt and a negative influence on this idyllic coven. Essentially, and all the men, obviously, in it are useless, incompetent morons who apologize for existing and then just kind of die. So I think that pretty much embodies everything about the message that I talked about before. It tries to be all of that. It was really that taken to its ultimate conclusion. And it was such a calamitous disaster that Disney themselves had to step in and say, don't worry, we're never making another series of that. We're really sorry.
Can Star Wars be saved, do you think? Is it now irredeemable?
I suppose anything is technically fixable if you're willing to throw enough time and energy and money at it. I think it would probably take a new trilogy of movies, and they would have to all be really good to start to win people back. And it would mean probably taking an upfront loss. So say they brought out a new Star Wars trilogy and it was hyped up as the biggest thing ever. That first movie is probably going to lose money. That would just be the reality, even if it's good, because the fan base isn't there anymore. People have moved away from it and there's no trust anymore. The second movie, people would start to get interested. Maybe there's something to this. It might barely turn a profit. And then the third one would probably be where people are won back, and that would generate the hype, the profit, and that would probably get the franchise back on track. Whether they're willing to eat that kind of cost, and whether they even have the ability to create some great new Star Wars trilogy at this point is really debatable. Because again, the pool of talent that they have there is not what it was when George Lucas was in charge.
And I want to ask about James Bond, because he's back in the news. The new director has been assigned, Denis Villeneuve, who's a brilliant director, is in charge of the Fantastic Dune franchise, among other things. But it's also now being handled by Amazon, and Amazon don't have the greatest track record. I mean, you mentioned Rings of Power earlier, which is one of their biggest disasters. So are you apprehensive, or are you confident about where James Bond could go? What's your feeling at this moment?
I'm absolutely apprehensive about it, yeah. A lot of it's going to come down to who they cast as Bond, because they still haven't decided. And we are several years removed from No Time to Die. You're going to have a real gap there, which means a real loss of momentum for the franchise. The franchise has written itself into a corner as well because they straight up killed Bond off at the last movie. So now they have to answer that age-old question of like all these different recastings of Bond. Is it the same character or is it just different people taking on the James Bond code name? Well, now we have a definitive answer. So there's none of that character loyalty that you had for generations, whether it was Connery, Moore, Lazenby, Brosnan. They were all loosely tied into the same chronology. Now we're just going somewhere completely different. And it's contentious now. I don't know if Villeneuve would be my choice for a Bond director. As you say, he's definitely handled the Dune movies really well. He does that kind of epic storytelling, but he's not exactly a fast-paced, action-oriented director, right? Which is what you need for Bond. Very slow, ponderous movies with about 2 hours of establishing shots. I don't know if his style is going to gel very well with James Bond. So there is that, and yeah, I'm honestly just waiting for it to be a race swap or a gender swap for the next Bond actor. I know they desperately want to do it, and I know they're trying to figure out a way that they can justify it. So we'll see what happens.
And do you think people are tiring of franchises in general? I sort of wonder whether even if, say, Marvel and DC, even if they hadn't gone a bit woke, would people not just be looking for new, interesting stories, stories that have... it's hard to think of the last, original film. I mean, even the film we've been talking about at the start is based on a 3,000-year-old epic.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain franchises that stood the test of time up until recently anyway. I mean, look at something like Star Trek. It began way back in the 1960s, and it was going relatively strong until the 2000s. It eventually sputtered out with that. They brought it back with the J.J. Abrams movies, which were, they made money, but they were pretty weak films. And then it's been bulldozed into the ground in recent years with terrible TV shows. I think what happens is oversaturation rather than franchises that have been running for too long. So the same thing with Marvel. Not only was there a decline in the quality of their product, but there was so much of it as well. You had TV shows multiple times a year. You had movies multiple times a year. It became like homework rather than a big event. So it was just too much too quickly. So there's certain franchises that I think can stand the test of time as long as they're measured and what you produce is done, to the highest standard possible. But I think because of all of that gradual erosion of all these once popular franchises, people now are desperate for new stories and original stories. And you see it now with the crazy success of things like Obsession. A little independent movie that was done on a budget of like $750,000 and has made like $400 million at the global box office. Just take a neat idea, get some good actors involved, and people will still show up for it. So it can still be done. Ideally, I want to see a bit of a reversion to that lower budget of filmmaking or mid-budget movies. So yeah, you can still do like a decent action, adventure, sci-fi movie for well under $100 million. You just need to be careful with how you use your resources. But then it means you can take risks creatively on things because there's not so much money at stake. When you're spending $200, $300, $400 million, you end up playing it safe and just making the same formulaic movie over and over again, like Marvel have done. And people get bored of that for sure.
And I was going to ask you about Obsession actually, and Backrooms, the other example of a kind of, relatively low budget indie hit taking the world by storm. I mean, do you think perhaps we need to look outside of Hollywood, outside of the main studios for exciting things these days?
I think so. And as I said, when you've got these low budget movies, they're willing to take chances with creative risks and something that's a bit outside the norm. And usually horror is a great genre for that because it's more a genre about ideas than spectacle. And so it's easy to do on a budget. And I think Hollywood being what they are, they'll probably learn all the wrong lessons from this. They looked at the success of Backrooms and now apparently they're trolling Reddit for other internet creepypastas that they can turn into movies. Yeah, sure. I would definitely go to Reddit for all my great creative ideas. So... yeah.
Should explain to viewers that don't know that this is so the film was inspired by a post on 4chan of a similar kind of, I guess the back room really of a sort of strip mall store. But yeah, I mean, it is taking the wrong lesson, isn't it? To think that you're just gonna, maybe they'll turn some tweets into a film or whatever. You know that.
I wouldn't put it past them, honestly.
I mean, yeah, horror is definitely having a revival. One genre that seems to have completely disappeared, especially in certainly in the cinema, is comedy. I mean, obviously, it seems to me that is a direct result of the kind of culture war that we've been talking about, the unwillingness to cause offense. But you know, could there be perhaps, now that we're undergoing a sort of vibe shift, now that people are tiring of political correctness, might we see a hit comedy? You know, once again, I can't remember the last hit comedy I saw in the cinema.
I think they're starting to dip their toes back into doing this again. I mean, we had the Naked Gun movie last year with I was going to say Liam Neeson, which is okay. It had its moments. They've got another scary movie that they brought out. They're bringing out Spaceballs 2. Again, a lot of these like old franchises that they're pivoting back to for the comfort blanket of knowing that it was once successful. So they're going to try that again. But yeah, great to see original comedies coming out again, original ideas. You know, I think people like myself and a few others, we often point to things like Tropic Thunder as being the last original comedy idea that was mainstream and successful. But you're talking like late 2000s there. It's been a long time. And as you say, like to do comedy, you have to risk offending people. It's just the nature of comedy. It's about laughing at people, situations. And we're so averse to that as a culture, and Hollywood in particular is so averse to that, yeah, it means taking a bit of a risk there. But I think as a culture, we're starting to get hungry for that again, because, you know, things about modern life are so absurd that all you can do is laugh at it. So why not?
The world is a lot funnier than it was 10 years ago.
It's hard to parody now, you know?
Yeah, exactly.